Okay, recording this video after close of trade Tuesday, 8th of October 2013. In fact, I'm recording this well after close. It's the next morning here, Wednesday morning, France time. And it's just a long day's trading yesterday, so a bit knackered last night, recording this video the next morning. So, we need to talk about trends percolating in lower time frames or propagating from lower time frames to higher time frames. We've got some good examples on that on the low time frames and the high time frames. So, I want to talk about that in today's video, but there we go. Let's look at these kind of high-level charts. First of all, 2.1 million contracts traded in exhaustion selling bar here, and been saying over the last few days this move was going to continue down until we get cyclical support on the higher time frames. So a few days ago we were kind of just messing around through having a little bit of support, a little kind of strength in the market, but no, we had time to run on better sine wave, and this is going to make a cyclical low at some point. We're kind of lining up for that, but let's talk about these trend moves and cycle moves in lower and higher time frames. So one of the beauties of the better sine wave indicator is that it shows you trends and cycles, and you can look at higher time frames and lower time frames in order to sync those up. So here's a high time frame on a daily chart, and we've got our cyclical low, cyclical high, and we're lining up for a cyclical low at some point over the next few days. And what you do is then you move it down to the lower time frame associated with that high time frame chart, which is the 45-minute chart, and then look for the trend moves in the 45-minute chart, pullback to end of trend, to sync up with those highs and lows. So you can see the high up here in the 1720s was a pullback to end of trend move on the 45-minute chart, syncing up with this cyclical high on the daily chart. Now on the downside, what we're looking for is pullback to end of trend move on the 45-minute chart in order to signal where that cyclical low on a daily time frame is going to come in. So we're kind of zeroing in, and what I say is trend moves in lower time frames, 45-minute chart for example, is equivalent to a cycle move in the higher time frame. So now what we've got on the 45-minute chart is we've broken support with yesterday's move or Tuesday's move, and we're looking to make that pullback to end of trend. We got this exhaustion selling on the downside. The other day we got it on the 40,500 tip bar chart here. This time around I said this was kind of pretty big dig, but not big enough. But today's activity, we definitely got it here with exhaustion selling on the way down. Now what that means is this potentially is a left shoulder from which we'll have a little bit of a bounce and put in a pullback to end of trend move on the 45-minute chart. Now when that syncs up nicely with this cyclical low, there's a potential of support kind of going on. The point I want to make in this chart is then, because I look at these on 3 time frames, 45, 135 and the daily chart here. Here's the trend move on the 45 minutes syncing up with the cyclical move here, but on the intermediate time frame, the 135-minute chart, we've not just pushed past this and just had a little bit of an overshoot on the 135-minute chart that's going to be, in my terminology, caught by a cyclical support here. We've moved well past the support level on the 135-minute chart. So now what we've got to see is we've got to see this time frame complete as well in terms of putting in pullback to end of trend. So we'll put in pullback to end of trend on the 45-minute chart. That'll be a little bit of a left shoulder on a head and shoulder inverted kind of head and shoulder move. Then we'll put in the pullback to end of trend on the 135-minute chart, which will be kind of the head move of this, and that will then sync up with this cyclical support or maybe overshoot it a fraction or whatever. The point I'm making is that all 3 time frames now need to complete. If this pullback level had kind of come in around here and we were just overshooting it slightly, we put in that support on this lower time frame, this one would be done as well, put in bullish divergence or whatever, and there's a high likelihood that this is all over in the next day and a half. But because we've traveled so far past the support on the 135-minute chart, we've also got to see a pullback to end of trend on this 135-minute chart. So there we go, and that's what I talk about, kind of these pullback to end of trend moves percolating or propagating through the different time frames. You'll see it on the 45, then the 135, and then syncing up with cyclical support or something like that on the higher time frame. We also saw it in the lower time frames kind of today. So let me just show you that on the 1500 tip bar chart, for example. So Tricky trading today because we had these incredibly wide ranges during the morning until we basically had some press conferences out of Washington, and then all of a sudden we got kind of a lack of confidence. It was likely to break down because we had blue professional bars at the highs here. We weren't seeing any blue professional bars at the lows. Then they come in here, cyclical support. These blue professionals bars do not hold. We break the lows of that into a trend move. So now on this kind of intermediate time frame, 1500, we got pullback to end of trend, we've got an exhaustion pattern and so on. So is this going to hold at this point here, kind of around the 60 level? Well, unlikely, because now we've moved into a trend move on the 4,500, the next tick for our bar time frame up. So we've moved into a trend move on this time frame. So this one has to complete. We have to put in our pullback to end of trend, and then an exhaustion pattern at the end of the day when all the blue professional bars kind of come in with an exhaustion pattern and so on. So that's what the point I'm trying to make in this video is that on all these different time frames, sometimes we're just moving. We have these trend moves happening in the lowest time frame and the highest time frame. These two time frames are working well, where we get these pullback to end of trends kind of syncing up. So sometimes the moves are resonating effectively in these two time frames, okay? But then with the bigger moves, they start resonating between this intermediate time frame and a time frame higher than this, so say a weekly time frame or something like that. And that's what makes trading interesting, because we're moving between these time frames, and that's why kind of using something like a fixed look back period with something with systems is always going to be tricky. It has to be adaptive, because we're sometimes moving, we're sometimes resonating in these time frames, and then we're sometimes resonating in these other kind of higher time frames here. So there we go. That's what to look for in the next couple of days. This move is not over on the downside. We're going to go through some volatility, I think, over the next few days until we start to put in the pullback to end of trend on the 135-minute chart. So although this is kind of due, in the next day or two, just look for that to maybe be broken and have a little bit of volatility around that support kind of come in, because this 135-minute chart has to complete, as I like to say in my terminology. So just looking at the 40,500 tip bar chart, this was the exhaustion pattern I talked about the other day, and of course what we had kind of coming up into this move, blue professional bars at the highs, bang, we've broken into this time frame. So again, this is just like the 45-minute chart here. We're below support on the 40,500 tip bar chart. This has got to be, go pull back to end of trend before finding that kind of area of support kind of in there. But big trending day today, so look out. It's just going to be choppy, I would say, over the next few days until we find that low. And then just to look at better X trend, because it's kind of flipped over quite a while ago, and you can see all these moves. Just want to show you the difference between the Dow and the Nasdaq here. So here's the Dow chart, and you can see how at 15,000 here this thing topped out. We broke through it with an exhaustion pattern kind of getting this thing going, and this kind of moved down really strongly. Now this is the exhaustion pattern kind of getting this thing going. This is the exhaustion pattern kind of coming to a temporary end. It's an area where we've had kind of some support kind of previously, kind of around here. So all that volume that was getting short is now kind of taking profits kind of down here. Let's see, we could easily see this kind of broken to the upside over the next few days and just kind of test around there. I still think, kind of longer term you've got a problem, but that's the strength of the move on the way down on the Dow. Here's the mini continuous contract day and night, and again we kind of broke into this move kind of here. And here's the S&P 500. A little bit similar to the futures kind of contract. Again, we're kind of moving down into kind of exhaustion patterns, kind of down here. But then here's the Nasdaq. So the Nasdaq, we traveled back to an area of previous resistance becomes support kind of thing. But really in terms of this chart, this is only just broken down in the last couple of days. Quite here. So the Dow is considerably weaker than the Nasdaq kind of Dow, which is kind of interesting, the difference between the two charts. But anyway, so let's see what happens. And yeah, there's the Dow. You can see, it's been running in this downtrend for days and days and days. In terms of my trading, this is what made it really tricky. So we had the sell-off in the afternoon yesterday. which was kind of propagated after we had pullback to end of trend exhaustion. And I always say, when you get the exhaustion pattern on the end of trend, wait for the second cyclical turn after end of trend. So there's the first cyclical turn, second cyclical turn after end of trend, and it's not a bad entry point, but you had to sit through a lot of junk and a pushback through it before it actually kind of really started to get going on the downside. But for me, tops take a while to kind of form. You can see this took hours and hours and hours to kind of get through here. I was short at the end of the day, and then I was just exhausted and tired, closed out my position, and that's when the breakdown happened at the end of the day. So I missed it, which is kind of unfortunate. But then overnight what we had, so that was during the day, you can see the exhaustion pattern here. I say always wait. There's a high likelihood 3 out of 4 days, once you get this exhaustion pattern, you'll get continuation the next day, and it's not going to be over until you see an exhaustion pattern during the full liquidity of the day. So here's the open of the day, and there's that exhaustion pattern. So that's what I'm kind of waiting for. But I kind of got wrong-footed a couple of times. I was down 5 points before this thing broke down, and I was mad with myself. But then when it kind of came good, it came good quickly. So this thing kind of broke down. We had a lot of volatility around the it was some kind of press conference kind of going on in Washington, and then as soon as we got kind of resolution as to which way it was going to break, bang. And then this thing just kind of ran and ran and ran all day. So I made back my 5 points and a little bit more by the end of the day, so I was quite happy with that. But messy at the beginning of the day. I suppose looking back, I shouldn't have been I should have been looking to short this kind of all the way through, but I just got wrong-footed. What was I doing? I was short once, short twice, then I went long, and then had to get out of that with a 2-point loss until I got short at 68.25, and then all of a sudden it kind of came good. So tricky, but them's the breaks. That's how it kind of works out. I'm going to be a little bit more circumspect over the next couple of days, just because I think we've had a big trending day. So the likelihood of big kind of 20-point days kind of goes down after we've had big days like that. So I hope you traded it well, and let's look for some kind of low to be made once this pullback to end of trend goes off on the 135-minute chart.